Welcome back everyone, it is Eric from Rare Candy, and today as you can see we're going to be kicking off my Silver Tempest coverage with a look at the brand new Lugia VSTAR deck. You know, debatably I think the most hyped new deck coming out of the set. I know Silver Tempest has gotten a little bit of flack for not being the most competitive, but I definitely think Lugia is one of the cards we at the very least should be taking kind of seriously that is coming out in this same set. But before we get into today's deck profile, if you guys are actually thinking about picking up some Silver Tempest cards for yourself, friends of the channel over at flipsidegaming.com are already taking pre-orders on sealed product. Use that coupon code RARECANDY at checkout to get a discount on even, yes, things like booster boxes, elite trainer boxes, etc. And Rare Candy's patrons not only had early access to an earlier version of this deck, but also have their own exclusive discount code for even bigger savings at Flipside. And also at the end of this video, if you're hungry for some more Lugia content, over on Patreon, I actually dropped a bonus article detailing some of the other ways you can play Lugia VSTAR. So if you want to help support the channel and get some cool bonus content in the process, I'll have links to all this stuff today down below in the description. But let's go ahead and jump into the deck list. So of course, up first we have 4 copies of Lugia V in the deck, and Lugia V, it's not the most impressive card in the world, but its first attack is kind of relevant here. For just a single colorless energy, we can discard a card from our hand and draw 3. So if we're going second and just need to get set up a little bit better, we can discard some cards to get up and going, and ideally we can toss away an Archeops as well, which as you'll see, is one of the key Pokemon in this deck we really want in the discard pile. But up next from there, of course, we have 3 copies of Lugia VSTAR himself, the big bad of this new set. So 280 HP on this guy, lightning weakness, fighting resistance, and a 2 retreat cost, and just has 1 singular attack here for 4 colorless energy, does 220, and you can discard a stadium in play. Now 220 is okay, but for 4 energy, normally this is kind of overpriced if we're being honest, but that's where its awesome VSTAR power is going to come in handy. It's an ability that allows us to get 2 colorless Pokemon from discard onto our bench, which means yes, we can even get evolutions with this ability. And that's where the brand new Archeops is going to come into play here. So Archeops has this ability that allows you to search your deck for 2 special energies and attach them to one of your Pokemon. So ideally by turn 2, we can get 2 of these in the discard pile, use Lugia to get them into play, and start accelerating some energy onto our field. And suddenly that awful 4 energy attack cost on Lugia becomes a lot more manageable. And with all the different special energy that we have in the format, there's a lot of really cool things we can do with this deck. But more on that towards the end of the deck profile. Up next from there, we have a copy of the Primate Wisdom Oranguru. So Primate Wisdom, it's good just in general to preserve key resources that you don't want to discard from your hand, because of course Primate Wisdom, we can replace a card in hand with the top card of our deck, so that's fine. But the real main reason we're playing this is because if we have special energy in hand, well, we can't really accelerate it with Archeops. So with Oranguru, we can maybe put one of those special energies back on top of deck and be able to get it back into play with our Archeops. Up next from there, we have a copy of Dunsparce, just because Lugia does have that pesky lightning weakness. So that means cards like Regieleki can make pretty quick work of this thing, and we really don't want that to happen. So of course, Dunsparce is going to eliminate that pesky lightning weakness. Up next, we have a copy of Pumpkaboo in the deck. This, of course, is to bump stadiums whenever we bench it from hand. And the reason we're playing this is because this deck gets kind of crippled by Path to the Peak, at least in the opening turns of the game anyways. And we really just want to make sure we don't get ability locked before we get our VSTAR power off. So that's why we have the copy of Pumpkaboo. I would say I wouldn't mind cutting this though, just because bench space is very tight with this deck, like extremely tight. So feel free to play with this slot in the deck, but it's definitely the most consistent way at finding ways to bump Path to the Peak. Up next from there, we have a copy of Radiant Gardevoir in the deck. Of course, that is going to have that ability that reduces damage to us by Pokemon V by 20. So Lugia already has a pretty good amount of HP, 280 is pretty fine already, but the Gardevoir is going to now put Lugia out of range of something like a Giratina VSTAR, and just in general make it more difficult for other one-shot oriented decks like Kyurem, Mew, etc. to be able to take those big one-hit KOs on our Lugias. And the last Pokemon we have in the deck is just a single copy of Crobat V, of course to draw up until 6 whenever we bench it from hand. But getting into our supporter cards, up next we have 4 copies of the brand new Serena, another new card from Silver Tempest. And this card is really cool. It has 2 different effects. We can either switch one of our opponent's bench Pokemon V with their active, or we can discard up to 3 cards from our hand and draw until we have 5 cards in our hand. But I'm pretty sure we have to discard at least 1 in the process. So what that means is in the early game, we have a pretty decent draw supporter that can allow us some additional outs to discarding Archeops into the discard pile. But also in the late game, this can be essentially a boss's orders for the deck to use too. Up next from there, we have 3 copies of Marnie in the deck just for a little bit of hand disruption. And also, shuffling cards back into deck isn't that bad, since if we have a bunch of special energy in hand, if we shuffle those cards back into our deck, or put them at the bottom, I should say, we can then re-accelerate those special energies with our Archeops. But we also do have 2 copies of Professor's Research as well. Of course, we want things in the discard pile, so Research is still way too good not to play. Of course, just discard our hand and draw 7. But we're playing the thicker Serene account just because this kind of acts as a boss's orders as well, in addition to being a discarding effect, so I definitely wanted to max that out as our primary discarding supporter. And even though we do have the 4 Serena already, I am also choosing to play 1 copy of Boss as well, just because this does allow us to gust up non-Pokemon V. And also, we're probably going to play a couple of Serena throughout the game to draw cards, so I still want plenty of gusting effects still left in deck for the late game. The only stadium we're playing right now in this list is going to be Collapse Stadium, so of course it forces both players to have 4 benched Pokemon. Collapsed is just pretty good in general. We can discard our own Crobat V from play, but it's also kind of disruptive against a number of other decks like Reggie, Mew, Palkia, etc. But the stadium in this deck I think is actually pretty flexible, and this is something I did write about in the article I mentioned at the beginning of this video. There's definitely a couple of other ways you could go with this, but Collapse seems pretty solid to me. For our items, we have 4 copies of Quick Ball in the deck, of course. We can grab our basic Pokemon, but also we have a discarding effect with this to maybe pitch away some Archeops in the process too. And on that note, as you would expect, we do also have 4 copies of Ultra Ball here as well. Again, it has a discarding effect that can get rid of Archeops, but we can get any card in the process. But our Pokemon search options do not stop there. We also have a whopping 4 copies of Evolution Incense in the deck. Probably the most copies of this card I've ever played in a deck, if I'm being honest. But this deck really feels like it just can't afford to miss the turn 2 Archeops and Lugia attack. So we desperately need to be able to find Archeops as soon as turn 1 and 2 of the game and be able to start chucking them away with cards like Ultra Ball, Quick Ball, and our supporters. We have 2 copies of Choice Belt in the deck, of course, just to increase our damage by 30 to Pokemon V. And we also have 2 copies of Air Balloon just to give ourselves free retreat. So those are our only tool cards in the deck, but we do have a little bit of tool card hate as well. We have a copy of Lost Vacuum. This is just another way at getting rid of cards like Path to the Peak if we do run into one of those early in the game. But also, of course, we can just get rid of things like Choice Belts and other things like that too by pitching away a card from our hand into the Lost Zone. Like, a part of me really wishes this was discard a card from hand instead of send to the Lost Zone. That would be so good, but unfortunately we are not quite that lucky, but still solid card for the deck for sure. And the last item card we have is going to be 2 copies of Hyper Potion to round out our items here. So of course we heal 120 from one of our Pokemon, but we do have to discard 2 energy in the process, which normally would be pretty annoying, but because we have Archeops and of course things like Double Turbo Energy, which you'll see in just a minute, it's actually really easy to abuse these things and get some healing in on our Lugia. You know, it doesn't do a whole lot against some of those one-hit KO oriented decks like Kyurem, Palkia, etc. But this is very good against things like Lost Box, Arceus, and largely other 2-hit KO oriented decks. But getting into our energy, we have quite a few different special energies. Up first is going to be debatably our most important one. That's Powerful Colorless Energy. Of course, just provides a single colorless energy, but it provides a 20 damage buff while attached to our colorless Pokemon. And suddenly this makes Lugia a much scarier attacker than it otherwise would be. So instead of doing just a measly 220, now we can actually push Lugia into range of big one-hit KOs, especially once we also factor things like Choice Belt into the mix as well. Silver Tempest is also giving us some defensive special energies as well. That's going to be 2 copies of the new V-Guard energy, another card I really have grown to love in this deck a lot. So it's kind of the inverse of Powerful Colorless Energy. It provides just a single colorless, but it gives you a minus 30 reduction against Pokemon V. Now, unfortunately, only one of these effects can be applied at the same time, but even still, with just one of these and a Radiant Gardevoir, we're going to be taking 50 less damage from Pokemon V, giving our Lugia effectively a maximum of 330 HP, which is insane. We also have 2 copies of Capture Energy in the deck, so of course, just again, another plain colorless energy, but whenever we attach it, we get search our deck for a basic Pokemon and put it on our bench. We also have 3 copies of Aurora Energy in the deck. Now, we don't really care about the sort of like rainbow energy effect it provides, but it's another special energy we can accelerate with Archeops, and also the discard effect that it forces you to do is actually pretty good. If we have to get this down in the early game, whenever we attach it, we can discard a card from our hand, and that can be our Archeops to maybe help get set up a little bit better. And for our last like single energy of the deck, we have 1 copy of Gift Energy, of course. Again, another one of these just vanilla colorless energies, but whenever the Pokemon it's attached to gets knocked out, we can refill our hand back up to 7. And then to round out our deck list, we have 3 copies of Double Turbo Energy. So honestly, we don't really want to attack with Double Turbo Energy that often because it does throw off the math with our Lugias, but Double Turbo is so good for whenever we do draw in the Hyper Potion. It's so easy to just accelerate one of these or attach one from hand for turn, and then heal off the damage of our Pokemon. So that's where I'm at right now with Lugia VSTAR. For this early list, as you can see, I don't really have too many crazy things going on. I definitely think there are a variety of different backup attackers and other tech cards and crazier things you could do with this. But to start out with here, I just want to explore a more streamlined version of the deck, and it has been doing pretty well, I have to say. But of course, guys, I want to hear from you down below in the comments. Hey, what do you guys think about this Lugia VSTAR deck? Are there any cards that you would change? Do you think the deck's going to be competitive when it comes out? Let me know your full thoughts down below. And like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, guys, I also did drop that bonus article over on Patreon detailing some additional ways you can play Lugia, including a bonus deck list. So if you do want to show your support for the channel, you can go check that out on patreon.com/rarecandytcg, or on the other hand, you can pick up some merch over at rarecandytcg.com. Links to everything will be down below in the description, but as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.